rotate the selector switch from safe to semi and let people protect their own damn property and start putting some of these people down.
The Georgia Virtue presents the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast.
This is episode 258. This week, we have an update on one of last week's stories. Slay the gay bill. A Buckhead poo storm. A deadly gang attack, yep, you guessed it, in prison. No land for some. And updates on the follies under the Gold Dome. I'm Dave Roberts. With me is my partner in this endeavor, writer, journalist, dog mom, and owner of the GeorgiaVirtue.com, Jessica Szilagyi.
What's up, Dave?
How was your week?
It was busy. I hate this time of year with the legislature, but, it's temporary. So, how was yours?
The yellow cloud of death is upon us.
Yes, it's terrible.
Oh, if anybody could hear it in my voice, man, it's bad out there.
It rained a little bit here on recording day, and it was just enough to make yellow puddles, and just
we got
a mess.
We got pretty decent rain, but I have a black truck, so every morning I go out to my truck and it's yellow. But yeah, it was the beginning of the week last week was so nice. Low 70s. I wanted to have the windows down and stuff like that. And immediately my sinuses start clogging up. I'm like, yeah, I start burning. And I know that is, I never had allergies as a kid. I mean, I've never bothered me, but getting old sucks.
It really does.
So we're not going to spend a lot. Yeah, well, I mean, more than a decade. Mm-hmm. Quick update on the bulk of the time we spent last week, but we're not going to spend that much time. Paulding County Sheriff's Office finally fired Deputy McMasters.
They did. I didn't know that.
His personnel file is a mess.
Really?
Yeah, yes, you can imagine. Going back to 2015, his supervisors reprimanded him in writing, saying that he can be unnecessarily overly aggressive. He was recently written up for aggressive behavior when dealing with an inmate.
Great.
At one point, he was advised to undergo anger management. And he was threatened with termination at one point.
Do you know when he was advised to go under anger management?
I don't. The story didn't have it. This is off at 11 Alive.
Because that's just interesting. Not good for the liability aspect for the sheriff's office,
No, and he's had a bunch of other infractions, such as locking somebody up and not getting the warrant in the right amount of time. Mm-hmm. And I believe that was for a domestic, so he walked out. He never got the warrant. Leaving drug evidence sitting out. Leaving a trainee in booking for an extended period of time.
It's crazy how minor and petty that stuff seems when you see what you see on the video with him, Like you said, not to belabor the story, but all of those things are important and all of them are violations and reasons for a write-up. But, leaving drug evidence out surely seems like a lot less of a problem than using unnecessary force.
Well, yes, individually, yes. But when you establish that you have a problem with chain of custody with evidence, that threatens, any prosecution.
Absolutely.
Had I been arrested by McMasters at some point and had a case pending, you're damn right. I'd make sure my attorney brought that up.
Oh, sure. His cases now are screwed.
And again, I don't make any apologies for how long it took. This should have happened probably before the incident ever took place. But I think all law enforcement at this point, they're so understaffed that you keep trying to find somebody and think you can train this out of them. I mean, I'd like to see his post certification revoked.
I'm sure it will be, especially a post certification or a post investigation is automatic when someone is terminated, so they'll at least be aware. And I've seen him suspended for a lot less, that's for sure.
Oh, I think at one point he used a jail car to run personal errands.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that reminds me that he can always go down to one of your cities down there and get hired on. I mean, hell, even if he drove the car drunk, he'd be fine.
Guyton's always hiring.
They are always hiring. Hey, look, I get the pressure out here. Cobb County on Dallas Highway, where Marietta Highway becomes Dallas Highway because it's crossing the county line. Cobb County's put a giant sign up with all their bonuses they're paying for transfer law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And they didn't just happen to put this sign at the Paulding County line.
That was on purpose.
Of course it was. Of course it was. Like, hey, we're right here. You can still live in Paulding County. We're right here. Take home car, this much, transfer bonus of however much it is. I don't remember how much it was.
A much
still
better
wasn't
life.
enough to. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's what they're advertising.
At least they're advertising better able to take care of your family.
Yeah.
That stuff starts. We have the same problem in the fire department. We sometimes get caught being a training ground for Cobb County. And it's the same. It's the same thing when I hire people to work for me. I'm a training ground for other companies because I can't offer the benefits that a big outfit can. Right. So you come to me, you learn the trade. I help you get your certifications and all that stuff, and then you're off making good money, work for somebody else, and have benefits. I'm okay with that. But a guy to turn a wrench is a lot easier to replace than somebody who's post certified. Mm-hmm. So anyway, SB 88 on gender in the classroom dyes the hands of unusual slayers. Yes.
The midpoint, well, it's not technically the midpoint, but day 28 in session is, for crossover, is Monday. And
as the show drops.
Yes. And so that means that, bills are starting to see their fate or take different shapes so that they can get them somewhat across the finish line, because that's the point that they've got to be either out of the House on their way to the Senate or voted out of the Senate on their way to the House. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Senate Bill 88 by Senator Cardin Summers, and it's the one where basically teachers would be barred from talking about identity, gender identity, and all that jazz in the classroom. So obviously it was controversial. It was among the ones that Summers was taking a lot of flack for. Lots of groups came out against it. And we had the conversation on the show that, it posed an interesting question because I felt like they were skipping a step in that it takes things away from parents, because if you're not going to make it like a form of child abuse, if you're not going to classify it as that, then you're kind of just usurping parental control over and giving it to the state, which is very odd. So anyway, as it turns out, I am on the same page as Mike Griffin, a lobbyist from the Georgia Southern Baptists, which is not really my favorite thing, but he's not wrong here. And he testified against the bill as it was kind of reaching its end, I guess you could say, and basically said, we've heard from folks, including lots of legal people and activists, and they're all concerned because this bill will very likely have unintended consequences for parental rights and for children in public schools. And those concerns have not been addressed, which, That was the problem with like every bill that Summers had proposed a couple weeks ago when we talked about him. I think he had 3 bills on the show.
Didn't he admit this bill had problems with it and dropped it anyway?
I'm pretty sure he said that. I believe he said it something along the lines like it needs to be rewritten or something to that effect. But which to me is the worst kind of governance, because it then puts you in a position. It puts Republicans. I mean, I hate the 2-party system, but it puts Republicans on the defense about all social issues, because then that gives Democrats the ammunition to say, well, at the time, like while we're going through this legislative session, they're already trying to do X, Y, and Z, and Republicans want to take away your ability to parent your own kid. And they think the bill needs to be rewritten, but they're still forcing it because they don't, it gives them so much ammunition for really no reason at all.
Who writes these bills? It wasn't Summers.
Well, it depends. A lot of times lobbyist entities or lobbying organizations
show up with it.
With the language, and then they take that to legislative council. And they make it worse, so that it can conform to what's already on the laws in Georgia and things like that. But
well, and one of my objections to the bill was, if nobody at the school can talk to a student who has questions, and they don't want to talk to their parents, who do they talk to?
Right.
I mean, who do you talk to? Now, all of us who have seen the shop teacher up in Canada with the giant prosthetic knockers, who's putting on a long troll up there. He just decided one day he's going to be a woman and puts on, I don't know if size double Z is a thing, but puts these things on and is wearing them in class to kind of point, I think, to point out the absurdity of transgenderism in the school system. So we all agree that really is inappropriate. But also, this bill, one, doesn't help it. Doesn't help anything. What it's going to do is going to push these kids who have questions onto the internet, onto Reddit, and other places where they're going to may not get good information on it. I don't know how to put in words common sense, and that's the problem we have with a lot of legislation. Is common sense says, no, teachers should not be recruiting boys to chop their wieners off and girls to add them on. But how do you codify that? How do you codify common sense? And it's damn near impossible. What it comes down to is get rid of public schools and let parents choose what school matches their values.
Well, and what's super interesting about it is that Summers conceded there were issues, and it was pretty widely talked about, but Mike Griffin, who again is like extreme far right, so I think he is on board with the end goal, just not this pathway to get there. So I mean, he supports the pathway to get there, but or the end goal, whatever. But he said that lots of lobbyists from different kind of, I guess, points on the spectrum of the political realm had offered advice and suggestions for language and to fix some of the concerns that were being openly discussed, and Summers would not accept it. So again, like, is Summers just trying to have a rise to fame because he was a nobody and nobody knew who he was? I mean, what's he doing? Like, what was the point?
I think there's some of that.
And he gave the unnecessary ammunition for a celebration, because after it failed in committee, because I think all but one lawmaker voted to table the bill, and it had to be voted out of that committee to get to the floor by Wednesday, by the following Monday. But they went and popped bottles of wine and champagne in the office of some of the Democrat lawmakers, which, like,
Well, you know you messed up when you have a guy with a collar on, a preacher's collar, and a 300-pounder with a pink hoo-hoo hat on, holding hands saying this is wrong.
right?
That's you done messed up somewhere.
But why be too prideful to take the feedback?
I don't know. I don't know if this is a campaign promise he made. I don't know if he stood up on the block when he was running for office and said, "I'm going to get transgenderism out of our public schools."
Yeah,
I don't know.
To me, if anything, it just shows that he is not good for governance, because if you can't it's one thing if you're like taking the constitutional route and you trying to restore powers or to the people or something like that, but like when you're taking on something controversial and you don't want to at least hear out all sides, you got problems. So
this also comes about when you don't go to people before dropping the bill. When you don't go to constituents, you don't go to special interest groups, and and say, "I'm thinking about dropping this. What are your opinions on it?"
Right.
And get feedback there and go, "You know what? Thank you. I could have made an ass of myself. I'm going to stick this in the drawer until maybe next year when I can rewrite it and it looks better." But the good news for him is nobody pays attention to it. The bill won't come to the floor. They can pop as many corks as they want in their offices. It doesn't matter. By the time the next legislative session will be 24, they'll be in and out and onto the campaign trail.
Yeah.
That's the only good thing when if you drop stupid legislation in the first session, before the election year, people generally forget about it.
True. Very true.
So, Buckhead's on fire.
It is. So obviously the legislation to make Buckhead its own city and secede from the city of Atlanta, mostly because of issues over crime and services, is advancing and has been advancing. And last week, Kemp's executive counsel, David Dove, released a 2-page memo that had like more than a dozen questions outlined for Senate Bills 113 and 114, which came out of committee earlier in the week, and basically put like a bunch of pressure on Kemp's floor leaders, which are Senators Bo Hatchett and Mike Hodges, and said that they needed to evaluate the proposal because there's constitutional and statutory challenges, which could basically have a ripple effect on Georgia municipalities for unforeseen outcomes. And so there's a couple of things here. Obviously, I wouldn't have expected Kemp to say anything about the city of Buckhead during the election. I mean, that would be idiotic because it is so contentious. But he hasn't said anything at all in the last, let's say, 90 days. And this has been talked about. It's been moving along. And here we are. It's coming to the Senate floor. And all of a sudden he's like having it's very uncommon for his office to have his lawyer send this memo and release this memo in opposition, because traditionally Kemp's office says we don't comment on pending legislation. Like, I've reached out to Kemp's office about legislation before. I've read comments where they've told that it's only when it's his initiatives, of course. But so the fact that he's stepping in here and standing in the gap and saying, you better slow your roll is a really big deal.
It's also, I think, a mistake. He could make private phone calls. He could have his floor leaders. He could call the lieutenant governor. He could call the speaker. and put this out there and say, these are the problems, and keep it internal. Unless they told him, said, no, if you want to be the bad guy, you be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Because look, I understand why Buckhead wants to be its own city.
So,
they're supplying all the money for the police and getting almost none of the protection.
Right. And response times are absolutely horrific, and plenty of other reasons. Their elections are a mess. I mean, everything's a mess. But
well, elections will continue to be a mess because that's county.
Sure, but when you have a lot of times, like, major cities will aid in the administration of, like, we have lots of cities down here that we have the authority to run their own elections, and then they just partner with the counties. But anyway, Burt Jones, our lieutenant governor, is in favor of this move with Buckhead, which is a shift from Jeff Duncan, because one of the reasons that it struggled last year was because of Jeff Duncan. But he said that, they're not doing enough to control crime, and they're not getting their money's worth. And obviously the bill is just about putting it on the ballot. It's not a final decision, but
which when his attorney came out and said, this is just a very loud minority. Well, then what friggin' difference does it make? Put it on the ballot.
Well, but he's brought up
if it's such a noisy minority, put it on the ballot.
But he's brought up some valuable concerns, which include the fact that Atlanta has bond debt that is allocated to certain portions, and people vote on those things, and they vote to collect taxes based on that. And it's similar to SPLOST money in the sense that they are, like, legally bound to that money. And then the other thing is that Atlanta public schools apparently have not been contacted at all. Fulton County schools have not been contacted at all. And currently anyone who lives in the Buckhead community has a child that attends an Atlanta City school, and Atlanta City schools are exclusive to city residents. People who are in favor of Buckhead have kind of just said that we'll just collect the taxes and still send our kids there, but, like, that's not legal. Like, if you live in Cobb County and you want to send your kid to Marietta schools, you have to get a waiver, you have to apply. And in Marietta, I don't know if it's still this way, but several years ago you had to pay a tuition. So I understand they're going to still collect taxes, but it just creates a whole host of problems. And apparently the school systems have not been consulted, which is fascinating to me, because this is not like, it's not like it's popped up 2 weeks ago and they're like, hey, you know what, maybe we should secede. Like, this has been on the conversation list for a long time.
And while those are valid points, I'll go back to mine, which is get rid of public schools. And that won't be an issue. At no point during this did the city of Atlanta say, all right, this is our plan to help better serve Buckhead.
They've actually never done that.
Because they don't care, because that's not where the votes come from.
No,
the money comes from Buckhead.
Right.
Right. The money comes from Buckhead. The votes come from everywhere else in Atlanta, where I was yesterday in West End. Where I guarantee you police don't patrol alone. And look, in Buckhead, a lot of them are rich white liberals.
Sure.
These aren't people with MAGA hats on. These are rich white liberals who basically say we agree in principle with everything. We just don't want to be associated with you.
And they're people who have had their businesses torched, their smash and grabs, their homes. You stop at a stoplight anymore down. Their lives have changed. Buckhead, when I lived in Buckhead before I moved to South Georgia, it was completely different. A world apart from what it is now.
Right. And here's the thing with Kemp being so opposed to it. He doesn't live in Buckhead. Yes, he occupies the mansion. He's not sitting at red lights. He's not seeing, like I saw in the West End yesterday, somebody selling pet turtles at an intersection. I kid you not, pet turtles.
Yeah.
He's not seeing that. He's not dealing with it. If he goes anywhere by helicopter or motorcade, he's Kemp's country boy. I don't know what put a burr under his damn saddle over it. Not that he can't oppose the legislation or whatever, but he's obviously pissed about it. And I know he's got a good working relationship with the current Atlanta mayor, and that could be it too. But for somebody who probably has his eyes on the Senate in 26, coming out with again, it'll be forgotten by 26, I know. But to come out that strong against it instead of just giving the same thing. I don't speak out. We don't speak on pending legislation unless it's one of my initiatives. That's it. That's all he had to say. And he can veto it. He can do whatever the hell he wants.
Well, yeah, that's something I've never understood. And Deal was just as guilty of making threats along the way. Like, if you want to be bold and, super iron fist about your values, then have the courage when it comes to keep your mouth shut, and when it comes to your desk to veto it. But our governors routinely do not do that.
And look, they're not going to have the votes necessary to override a veto.
No way.
Yeah, there's just no way in hell. Especially once it hits the governor's desk, he vetoes it, sends it back. Then everybody who needs the governor's help is going, ooh, we're just going to let this one slide. But it seems like executives are so worried about using the veto pen. They're so worried about it. Because then they'd have to take a stand on something. But I don't know. I completely empathize with the people of Buckhead. That's why there's a huge migration of Buckhead money into Cobb County right now. It's not that far to go from Buckhead, especially area of Buckhead near Roswell Road and all that stuff. It's right across the river, and you're in Cobb County.
Yeah.
And then you've got Cobb County schools. You got East Cobb schools, as a matter of fact. East Cobb schools. You've got a dedicated county police department. And and honestly, I believe in Cobb County, you get a discount at 62 or 65 on your property taxes. So, what we're seeing in the real estate market, especially in that area of Cobb County, is we're seeing a lot of Buckhead money leaving Buckhead and moving out to, it's only maybe a move of 5 miles. Getting better roads, better service, and safer environment in Cobb County than had in Buckhead, which is a lot of it's actually into Cab.
No.
Buckhead neighborhood reaches over to part of DeKalb. It may not be what would be considered the city of Buckhead, but yeah. some of the stuff the houses I go to, they say I'm in Buckhead. I see the DeKalb County signs. I'm going there.
Yeah.
But I don't know why this is the fight he decided to get involved in. And it seems somewhat beneath the governor to get involved in whether or not a city wants to form.
I concur.
This is a good time to remind you that these are our opinions and not those of anyone not on the show or any respective company for which we may work, own, or otherwise associate ourselves with on a regular or irregular basis. Also, you can find other episodes and relevant stories over at thegeorgiavirtue.com. Jessica, it's time for the mule.
Yeah, speaking of idiots and stupid-ass cities, in the city of Statesboro recently during a council meeting, we have this thing called the Creek on the Blue Mile. Really, it's a ditch on the Blue Mile that they have. Blue Mile is like our downtown road in Statesboro that has some restaurants, and they do farmers market and things like that. Takes you to the courthouse square and all that jazz. So anyway, there was a recent, they're doing all these improvements. Army Corps of Engineers is involved because they are using this creek they were making a reservoir and for stormwater and floodplain management and all that. So it's been several years in the making, and there's been lots of grants and different places that the money's coming from, including there's some state money coming, and I think it's been like 4 years, a little more than 4 years. But so far they have done nothing really. Like all they've done is draw plans, collect money, bank money, initiate loans and everything. And in that time period, obviously, like everything has, costs have skyrocketed. The project went from like a projected $30 million to closer to $40 million. And so during the council meeting, Councilman Phil Boyan brings this up and says, it's a big deal that all these costs are going up and the project scope is getting smaller. Like now they're not talking about doing a reservoir at all. They're just talking about diverting water elsewhere. And he's like, we're talking about spending $30 to $40 million to get a $10 million return on investment. And that's a terrible investment. No one in this room would do that. The conversation went on for about 15 minutes of him questioning the city manager and arguing back and forth with his other council members, just belaboring what a ridiculous concept this was. And then at the end of it, he said, well, I'm going to make a motion to move forward with this because I believe in this project. So he did.
Those projects never, ever, ever net the gains that they promise.
No.
I mean, look, the movie studio in Paulding County, we took a bond, built it, in a recession, mind you, when property prices were very, very low, and then sold it for half what we had invested or something like that to a private company just to get rid of the damn thing, and then didn't even take the proceeds from that and pay the bond down. They said, no, we can do more, we can do better with this money, and we'll put it somewhere else because government has such a great history of making wise investments.
Well, it's a terrible investment. I agree with him on that. But worse, what kind of clown spends all that time belaboring it, pointing out factual points about it, listing off numbers, and then saying, I'm going to vote
Motion
for this.
to approve.
Yeah.
You suck. Nobody should ever do this. It's a horrible waste of money. Motion to approve.
Yeah, terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I mean, well-deserved. Well-deserved, Councilman. Well-deserved. But you're going to have to do a lot better or a lot worse to really catch up. So, deadly gang attack set in motion by prison guards.
Yes. So this isn't one I want to spend too much time on because we do have a lot of legislature stuff to talk about. But I did think it was worth highlighting because the recently appointed Department of Corrections Commissioner Tyrone Oliver recently was on a call in which he said that he was excited about joining the Department of Corrections. This was the morning after the warden down here was arrested. And he's like, I'm excited about being here, and I just love the culture. I'm really looking forward to being part of the team, blah, blah, blah. So as it turns out, the culture is, I mean, this isn't a surprise to nobody, but the culture is absolute crap. And anyone who thinks that the culture is anything worth joining as going to be part of the problem. So Phillips State Prison in Buford, Georgia. There was a murder there last year. A 19-year-old, his last name's McBride. I don't know how to say his first name, and I don't want to...
Quafabian.
Yeah, maybe. Allegedly. But his last name is McBride. And he was killed in prison. So, first of all, his mother was told by inmates that her son had been murdered. She kept calling the prison, and they're like, "Oh no, he's fine. He's not even in that unit." But he actually was killed in that unit on September 30th. And he was in the lockdown unit because officers put him there. And he was killed, according to an inmate who watched it all happen, when a mission to perform a, quote, hit on a rival gang member went awry. This is a story that was reported by Danny Robbins from the AJC, and he does a phenomenal job reporting on the Department of Corruption. But we'll link to the story. But they removed officers from their posts. So I guess you could say they demoted them and moved them to another position after this because they're getting sued over their decision to do this. And basically what they did was there was a witness who is acting as a whistleblower and attesting to all of this, which is pretty scary when you think about it as a side note, like being an inmate in the Department of Corrections and being a whistleblower on Department of Corrections employees, because if they're willing to help a gang, like how, I don't know. But this other inmate basically, so let me back up. This whistleblower, Joseph Williams, said that he saw officers make it possible for McBride and 2 other inmates to attack another gang member whose last name is Simon. So the guards went in, removed Simon's cellmate, unbolted the cell door, and then brought McBride into the lockdown unit, even though he wasn't a lockdown inmate. And I guess Simon knew that something was up because his cellmate was removed and something was off with the door. So as soon as McBride entered his cell, he stabbed him in the heart. Very gruesome. And apparently he took a few steps and pretty much fell over dead right there. But McBride was never supposed to be in the lockdown unit. The lockdown unit is in prisons that are not Smith State Prison, that are actually like full, 23 hours in their cells. Like they're not out wandering around. The doors are not unlocked. And so these guards quite literally opened the door for this to happen. And then they were going to kill this one guy, Simon. Well, Simon's now been charged with felony murder. He's claiming self-defense. All over the Bloods and the Crips. And it begs the question of like, we had this conversation when we talked about the warden in Smith, but like, what are you supposed to do when you have people in the system who work for the system helping coordinate? Like, they should be charged with conspiracy. They should be charged with party to a crime. All the things we charge people on the outside with.
Violation of oath, probably taking bribes. I mean, look, there's they didn't do this just because they like the Cribs or the Bloods. This is one of those cases where we're defending the worst people in the world. Quafabian McBride, not a good guy, apparently. I mean, he went in to go kill somebody. Phillips,
with another person too.
Yeah, and the guy who defended himself, yes, you can charge him with having contraband by having a weapon, but to hit him with murder for defending himself, for somebody who should have never been, the biggest problem is the corruption, and I don't know how you root it out.
No, and you cannot say, well, inmates are creative. They have all day long to just sit and think about things. Yes, that is true. But from where McBride was housed in a traditional dorm to the lockdown unit is 100 yards away and 3 security checkpoints. So
he got through 3 security checkpoints with a weapon, presumably. And then got open a door. Yes, this is a plot out of a really cheesy 80s TV show about moving prisoners from one cell block to the other in order to get somebody who's a troublemaker. I mean, it really is. I think this has been a plot of the A-Team, if I can remember back that far. I mean, that's how bad this plot is. I mean, the corruption is what bothers all of us. I mean, look, they are in our, as citizens, in our care, in our charge. I'm not saying we have to, maybe the cure is to go to 100% lockdown, have minimum security and maximum, and that's it. And the majority of prisoners that are felons are locked up 23 hours a day. So the only person they interact with is their cellmate. I don't know that we have the facilities for that. I just don't know. I mean, and again, she finds out about it from prison cell phones.
Right. Which is terrible. I mean, and God only knows how long it would have taken her to find out had she not been notified by them. I mean, family members...
Until they could clean up the evidence.
Wait days and days and days before... And it's not like she would have been able to go be with him. I mean, he dropped dead right there. But the whole thing is... Somebody made an interesting observation on your page talking about the cell phones, the contraband, is a lot of the times that we're finding out about the corruption that's going on behind these doors is because of the prisoners having cell phones. Because the prisoner was somebody was like, no, he was taking it from here to here, and this is what happened. This wouldn't have been if the news hadn't gotten out from I'm not supporting having contraband cell phones in prison, but had the news not gotten out that way, we would have never heard about it. He would have been just another dead felon, another dead gangbanger. Well, I mean, you would still have the witness.
A witness to what?
The
I
witness
understand. But we've said it the last few weeks talking about law enforcement in prisons. Every prisoner goes, no, they're crooked, and we as a society tend not to listen. Like they all say that. It's sort of like the old people in the retirement homes. My nurse is stealing from me. No, they're not, Dad. And every once in a while, it's true. That's the curiosity from a lot of us, because we don't know what happens behind those doors. That's what makes plots of movies about prison and things like that, is because there's a natural curiosity, because the vast majority of us, thank God, aren't going on that side of the wall. Once again, there's no easy solution to it. All right, so let's get on to some shenanigans going on under the Gold Dome. Bill preventing some land ownership in Georgia.
Yeah, so this one is moving along. It was in rules. To my understanding, as of the recording, it had not made its way out, but I fully expect this to be a crossover day.
2 a.m.
Well, yeah, no, not that late, but yeah, I expect it to be a crossover day bill. But so basically, Clay Perkle from South Georgia has legislation pending to bar individuals, governments, and entities that are considered foreign adversaries of the United States, to bar them from buying agricultural land within 25 miles of a military base. It also it bars them from directly or indirectly acquiring their, So the kicker on that is that if an entity has there's a lien or something and they acquire it through the debt process, they are required by law to dispose of the property within 3 years.
All right. The first problem with this is defining adversary. Every country on earth is our adversary in one way or another. Doesn't mean we're all going to war with them. Means that we all compete. We all compete for resources. We compete for talent on the global market. We compete for bringing companies to our shores, just like Kemp did when he went to Davos. He was out there competing with other municipalities around the world to bring that money from the World Economic Forum to Georgia. So how are we going to define it? Is Russia an adversary right now? Probably. Even though we just last week took their cosmonaut up to the International Space Station. Is China an adversary? Absolutely. Does the federal government define them that way? No. They call Saudi Arabia an ally. The House of Saud is not an ally to the United States. We are allies of convenience when needed. So how do you define that?
I don't know.
And 25 miles, that's very arbitrary. To own agricultural land within 25 miles of a military installation.
Yeah.
You know, that's very arbitrary. And if you lend on that property, you have to essentially auction it off within 3 years. They say dispose of it.
Yeah, I think it's offensive that we want to say in America that certain people can't own land. I don't care who you are. Like, if you have private property rights did not apply to U.S. citizens only. They don't, because if they did, people wouldn't be able to buy land through an LLC or a corporation or whatever. And I can't wait for this to bite them in the behind with some economic development project through some development authority or whatever, because they can't own it they can't have a majority share or, full ownership.
It's the same thing they did with TikTok. When they said the Chinese government can't own TikTok in the United States. They still do. The Chinese still own TikTok. Of course they do. Of course they do. So all this does is put another level of paperwork between ownership of the property and the Grand Masters. And I know this comes up over the reports of farmland being snatched up around the country by Chinese. But anything on that level needs to be addressed by the Congress, not the state legislature. Because who in the state is qualified to say who an adversary is?
Well, yeah, and also, if you consider it from the standpoint of how political, government should not be deciding that at all, because government is too political and too rooted in individuals' ideology. It's why the Bill of Rights doesn't have an ideology; it just is. But this is the same concept. It's going to ebb and flow based on what's going on, and what happens if there's? I know this is unlikely, but that doesn't mean that it's not something to consider. What happens when you have a deal in progress and some country is declared an adversary? Because what the bill requires is for basically a realtor to do the due diligence on this, which has the realtors up in arms and the lawyers for the realtors groups and lobbying organizations up in arms, because their argument is that this is going to violate the hell out of the Fair Housing Act, which, you're discriminating based on national origin outright. And Clay Perkle's response was, I think he said 12 other states maybe had passed legislation like this, and he was confident that Georgia's was the best in the nation, and that was all he had to say about that, which is really an offensive response to somebody's legitimate concerns about how something will impact their industry, right? You might feel like it's the best idea ever, but should you still be respectful of their legitimate concerns that their lawyers are saying, hey, we're waving the red flag here, this might cause us some massive problems?
Yeah, and look, Venezuela. They're citizens now, but I've got some friends who are from Venezuela. He was an engineer in Venezuela, and he escaped. But until he became a U.S. citizen, under this, he would have been barred from buying any sort of agricultural property within 25 miles of a military installation. And he wants nothing to do with the regime down there, I assure you. But just because of his national origin, they're adversaries. Nope. All right, let's start hitting some stupidity here.
Well, I do want to say one more thing, and this is a stupidity thing, but I just want to say, the one thing that they're forgetting is that we have domestic terrorism too. And we have groups here that are considered threats to our republic and our democracy, or whatever you want to call it, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, their threats. And they can buy land wherever they want. We don't limit them. So
Right.
It's just inconsistent. But talking about stupid bills, last week was full of them. In terms of ones that passed out of the House, not just dropped, because if you look at ones that are just filed, it's off the chain. Deborah Stillcox from Buckhead, Sandy Springs area, she had HB 500 to create a special new crime for people who torch a police car, subjecting them to 5 to 20 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. And the reason that she almost made Mule of the Week is because one of the lawmakers in the Rules Committee was like, "Hey, Rep. Silcox, do you have any type of evidence that suggests that mandatory minimums act as a deterrent for a crime?" And she's like, "This is not a mandatory minimum." And he was like, "Well, actually, felonies have a 1-year minimum. So if you're making it a minimum of 5, that is a mandatory minimum." And she's like, "No, that's not what this is. The sentence is 5 to 20 years.
She's smart.
She's not. But what's even more hilarious to me. So another question was like, why is this necessary? And she answered that because of the chip shortage. Well, my understanding was that all cars have chips in them. And she said also because of the equipment outfitting, which, I understand. We have seen that in local agencies where there's problems getting, or not problems, a slowdown or a slight delay in getting equipment. But what about the business? Like you're telling me that if you have a Georgia State Patrol Tahoe and a regular Tahoe parked parallel in Buckhead and some rioters walk up, that government vehicle is worth more than...
First of all, it's a Cadillac in Buckhead, be an Escalade. Yeah, well, yes, this goes right back to creating separate classes of victim. So if you burn my business that's worth millions of dollars, but you leave the police car out front, your sentence starts off at 1 year for the felony.
Well, I don't think that's a fair equation because they are trying to they did actually pass something to heighten the offense for rioting too. So, but like if you have 2 cars sitting side by side and one is privately owned and one is government owned, why is the one that has where the government is, quote, the victim, why is that one worthy of more punishment?
Well, the people who are doing this are not thinking about the punishment. Not that we've seen. What we've seen are people in masks. You have no idea who threw that firework. You have no idea who did what. If you just happen to catch somebody, is the next person who is rioting with a backpack full of fireworks going to think about, oh man, he got 5 to 10? No. And in fact, if being the smart ass that I am, if I were about to riot, I'd put police tape around all the police vehicles and say, "Caution, this will cost you 5 years," and then go burn everything else down. And just be a complete smart ass about it.
Yeah. Follow Dave for more rioting tips.
Yeah, you want to cure this? Rotate the selector switch from safe to semi and let people protect their own damn property and start putting some of these people down. If you want to pass a law that says that you can respond to protect your own property in a riot with deadly force, that will cure it.
Well, sure. Absolutely.
Right.
But
fill those gutters with blood and it'll stop happening. You should have a right to protect your own property. The fact is the government won't even protect its own property because what they do in face of a riot is shrink up and go get inside somewhere instead of trying to protect the public.
All true.
And when you do have somebody with the balls to stand up and defend himself, he gets to go on trial for his life. And luckily, he was found not guilty. I'm talking about Rittenhouse. But you finally find someone with the balls to protect private property, and you try to make an example out of him. Those are the laws you need to fix, not create a separate class of victim because you hurt the government. Government's the only entity that has the ability just to replace what's burnt. I can't. You burn everything I own, and I'm stuck.
Yep.
Yeah. What else do we have?
Well,
Monday motivation.
Yeah. So the law or the House made HB 237 a thing, pass it out into the Senate to make the official soapbox derby of the state of Georgia to be the Southeast Georgia Soapbox Derby in Lyons, Georgia. So, yeah, we're halfway there to having an official soapbox derby designation. Sorry to all the other soapbox derbies around the state. F you. Yeah.
Well, the gravity works better there.
It's flat here. It is literally so flat. But yeah.
All right. What else we got?
Just quickly. So there was a legislation to make it unlawful to hunt wild game with the use of electronically imitated or amplified calls or sounds unless you're hunting bobcat or fox. Big time issues. And then perhaps one of the, going back to the police, I don't know, I guess we'll just hammer on them since you just talked about them running and hiding away. But Kemp is creating a student loan forgiveness plan for peace officers. So once you've been a peace officer for 1 year, live in the state of Georgia, you can have up to $20,000 over 5 years of your tuition forgiven by the state of Georgia for each year of credible service. Right now, there's $3.2 million in the budget for it, and it'll work on a first come, first serve basis. But, first of all, we're not talking about academy costs. Like, yes, we know that there's law enforcement shortages everywhere, but we're not talking about academy costs because a lot of agencies will pay for someone to go to the academy and they only have to stick around for 2 years. So what they're talking about is like actual college and university educations, which people are not going into choosing not to go into law enforcement because they want to get a bachelor's degree, but they can't afford it. Like that's not how people pick that job. And so I'm not sure what this is going to do in terms of recruiting. They say we're like 5,000 officers short or something across the state in different agencies. And that's just in the vacancies that they have, like not full staffing. That's just in what they're advertising to try to fulfill.
I could see a law enforcement relevant degree. Criminal justice.
I believe it has to be criminal justice, but and they have to be full-time.
Full-time students or full-time officers?
They have to be a full-time peace officer or a full-time peace officer enrolled in a study of criminal justice to apply for the grant. So,
yeah, I mean, look, the military's been doing that for years. Give us 4 years, we'll give you 4 years of college. The
it's
GI
a little bit
Bill
different though, because a lot of people know you can go into the military and then you can leave. Like, most people don't go into law enforcement planning to leave. I think most people go into it as a career and then are surprised if they leave. Or they're surprised by the end.
Military's a lot the same way. You get in thinking it's going to be awesome and you get to do all this awesome stuff. And, 4 joint surgeries later and 5 deployments, you're like, all right, I got to get out of here.
I guess what I'm saying is that there are plenty of people who join the military strictly because they will pay for your education. I don't think there are people going into law enforcement I don't think you're going to get people going into law enforcement. Also, $20,000 is really
drop in the bucket.
Yeah, I mean, but whatever, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I of all the things they've done, that's you're right. I don't think that's going to fill the void. I don't think a bunch of people are going to go, you know what, $20,000 in college, sign me up. Where do you want me? West in Atlanta? Yeah, sure. Give me a car and a uniform. Let's go. All right. As we're winding down, Jessica, your closing thought?
I just wanted to announce that I have been interviewed in several episodes of the Prison Town podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's a deep dive into Smith State Prison, which we've talked about a lot and I've written about a lot, but it also talks about a lot of the corruption within the Department of Corrections, and it's produced by the Center for Collaborative Journalism in Macon, and by a super talented woman named Evie Weatherby, but she was kind enough to let me participate in some of the episodes and offer some of the research that I've done, and it's just a really fascinating storyline of like a lot of the stuff I've been reporting on. So it's on, like I said, Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Sweet.
Yeah.
My closing thought is I've booked a trip for later in the year, going to Greece. Yeah, I was looking to upgrade because I have to have domestic legs go from here to JFK over to Athens and from Athens to Boston back to Atlanta. I was looking to upgrade those seats. There's Delta's got some stuff, and trust me, I'm a Delta homer. I grew up in a Delta family. That's almost exclusively who I fly, unless there's, like, if I'm within Greece, I can't fly Delta. I have to fly their own airline, Aegean. But other than that, I'm a Delta homer. There was $1,000 difference per leg per passenger on their website and on their app. I'm not talking about going to a third-party app. I'm talking about the Delta app versus the Delta website. $1,000 per passenger per leg. That's $4,000 difference between booking the upgrade on the app and booking it on their webpage. So that's just my gripe of the week. Yes, I used the app to do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have spent that much money on what is essentially a 4 hours of flying time domestically. So if you happen to be booking travel, look at the website and the app before you book. So on that bit of travel advice, thank you very much for listening. If you like what you heard, like us and share us on Facebook and other social media. If you don't like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe your friends so they have to suffer the same way you did. If I can talk. So for Jessica Salaji, my partner in endeavor, Eric Cumby, our awesome editor, I'm Dave Roberts. Have a great week.
Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon.